We are moving forward from infancy and childhood into adolescence. Adolescence it starts with puberty and goes through the upper teen, lower 20 age, and is right where most of you watching this video are, being AP psychology students. So this one should kind of ring some bells for you. So let's talk about physical development. Adolescence technically begins with puberty, which is individual in what age that is, but is normally between 11 and 14 years old. And this is when your sexual reproductive organs mature. And not just the reproductive ones, but the secondary sexual organs that also mature. It has important implications for the way adolescents feel about themselves. So self-image can be greatly impacted by when one physically matures, and that if one is a late bloomer, that has a lot of impact on the person's self-concept and self-image. So early maturing boys tend to do better in athletics, are generally more popular, and have a more positive self-concept. And the whole athletics thing kind of makes sense because they are getting bigger and going through a very large growth spurt, right? And that makes them better in sports. But because of the gender roles that we have surrounding masculinity, it then creates a more positive self-concept in the child, and they're more popular. Yet they tend to have more difficulty in school. They commit more acts of delinquency, become involved with substance abuse, seemingly due to the fact that because they look older, they are friends with older boys and do those things. However, in the long run, it seems that early maturing boys are typically more responsible and cooperative later in life. And I think this is the idea that they have been mature longer and therefore have learned some more. Early maturing girls are more sought after for dates and have better self-esteem than later maturing girls. For different reasons, right? Because it's the onset of what our culture deems as femininity and what makes women attractive. Yet early development can be a bit embarrassing for girls and has a lot of impact on their self-image. And then there's a lot of negative connotations surrounding female puberty and maturity in adolescence, and that it's something that we shouldn't talk about and should remain hush-hush, and therefore not talking about it remains unknown and kind of a scary, weird, ugly thing. And that's unfortunate. Late maturation can produce psychological difficulty for both boys and girls. Boys who develop later are often smaller, less coordinated, which often leads to ridicule and being seen as less attractive. And in time, the boys may begin to view themselves in this way. And we kind of talked about this because of the cultural concept of masculinity. Girls who develop later are at a disadvantage in junior high and early high school. They hold a relatively low social status and might be overlooked in dating, yet they report greater satisfaction with their bodies later in high school and college, mainly because late maturers tend to be tall and slim, which is the societal idea of social beauty. So it's kind of a seesaw, right? Some give and take, pros and cons. So let's talk about cognitive development in adolescence. Usually in adolescence, you're in the formal operational stage. This is the last stage of Piaget. And begin to reason hypothetically and deduce consequences, which leads to greater understanding and comprehension of broad moral principles, which is a good segue into moral development. So Piaget had cognitive development, Kohlberg has moral development. He believed that moral reasoning helps guide our judgments and behaviors, and he proposed dilemmas to help people reason at different levels. The theory assumes that people move through levels in a fixed order. Now, there's no real ages to match up with the levels like there was with Piaget, but he believed that one could not reach the highest level until at least 13 years old because cognitively they couldn't understand it before that point. He helped people progress through levels by posing moral dilemmas to solve. So let's look at these stages. Preconventional is the first one. This is when a child or person performs actions based on rewards or punishment. This is very selfish, or you could argue egocentric, self-centered morality, and usually is in young children. You have to ask yourself when you're looking at a test question, and I would write this down, when looking at a test question, whose answer is on moral development? You need to ask yourself, Why are they doing the right thing? Not are they doing the right thing. This person has chosen to do the right or wrong thing, let's say. Why? Why have they chosen to do the wrong thing? Well, if it's because they got a cookie or a star for every good behavior, good deed, or doing their chores, that would be pre-conventional. The next stage is conventional. The person is interested in pleasing others and doing what is right by social laws. So they are considering more than themselves. They think of family, of loved ones, and society as a whole. This is also where people tend to try to save face or their reputation. They don't want to be someone who does or doesn't do the right thing. So they do the right thing because they don't want to be seen as bad. That's still conventional because it's about their reputation. Post-conventional is when they use higher reasoning to guide behavior. So they think about terms of justice, equality, basic human rights when making decisions. So they live by the golden rule, and Kohlberg didn't think that many people made it to this level of reasoning, and that I'm going to treat you this way because I hope that everyone acts this way, and it can be a better world, it can be a better life for more people. Now we're moving on to social development, and Erik Erikson is your man here. So Piaget, cognitive, Kohlberg, moral, and finally Erik Erikson with social development. So it's kind of psychosocial development, and it involves our changes in interactions and understanding of one another, as well as our knowledge and understanding of ourselves as members of society, hence social. He believed that passage through the stage required resolution of a conflict. So you'll see in each of the stages, this being the first one, it's all about a conflict. So you'll see a word versus a word. You need to know both sides of the verses. You got to know both, and you have to know what both of them mean. I'm going to take you through each stage, hopefully helping you to key into what's going to help you remember each of these stages and when they are. Trust versus mistrust is birthed through about 18 months old, and they're asking, can I trust the world? Or they're finding out, can they trust the world? Think about it. A baby is entering this world. They've never been here before. Is it trustworthy? And it's dependent on others to meet their physical needs and need for love. So if the parents care and you become attached, you'll develop a sense of trust and predictability. Like, I can trust this world, so I'm going to move forward. I'm going to learn. I'm going to thrive and prosper. But if there's inconsistent or lacking care, it will cause the infant to develop a sense of mistrust or paranoia. And that causes a certain kind of temperament amongst them, and that they aren't able to trust others and move forward and learn and thrive. Autonomy versus shame and doubt is about 18 months to 3 years old. And this is, do I have some control over my life? At this point in my life, I have someone, my 14-month-old in the trust versus mistrust. And then I have someone, my 2.5, almost 3-year-old, in the autonomy versus shame and doubt. And oh boy, is he ever in this stage. So do I have some control over my life? If the parents set boundaries, like don't pick up the scissors, a 2-year-old should not be playing with scissors, right? Yet they let their child make some decisions, like, would you like to wear your blue or your red shirt today? They will develop a will or a sense of independence. And autonomy, right? That's what autonomy is. And you can't, in an FRQ, use the word itself to define it. So you got to use something other than autonomy. This is their will, their sense of independence. If the parents are overly restricting, the children will be unable to assert themselves, yet if the parents are too lenient, the children become overly demanding and controlling. So the child will also have a sense of shame and self-consciousness. Okay, so they feel shameful and doubtful if they're unable to do things for themselves. My son in this stage right now is very much, me do it, me do it, me do it. Like, I want to do it. I want to open my yogurt, or I want to buckle my car seat. Initiative versus guilt is 3 to 6 years old, and this is, am I capable of doing things for myself? So autonomy is a sense of independence, and yes, am I able to do things on my own? Whereas initiative versus guilt is more about the skill. So you see their imagination developing, they become more curious, they're asserting their independence. So if parents react positively to these items, children will feel confident to take risks, have self-confidence. If parents react negatively, the child will lack self-sufficiency, have low self-esteem, and fear punishment. They're going to feel guilty, right? Whereas initiative is, I'm going to take the initiative to do things on my own. Industry versus inferiority. This is like the elementary age. Am I capable of doing things socially? So they compare themselves with others in social and academic aspects. So they feel that they can do tasks, they have a sense of pride, and that they do fit in. The industry part is like where they might find themselves getting good at things. Like if there's a boy who's really good at dodgeball or tetherball or something on recess, that's his industry, you could say. He feels very confident in that area. Or if somebody's really good at math or social studies, they're finding that industry, their competence there. Or they could feel inferior or not as good as others when comparing themselves to their peers. Identity versus role confusion is where most of you are watching this video in adolescence, 12 to 20 years old. It's who am I? Where is my place in this world? You're going through this transition from childhood to adulthood, trying to discover who you are, what your strengths are, and what kind of roles you are best suited to play. You are finding your identity. So you have a sense of who you are and are a commitment to your future adult roles in the identity part. But in the role confusion part, there's confusion over what role to play, and it can lead to an unstable identity and adoption of socially unacceptable roles. Pressures to identify with what one wants to do with one's life are acutely felt in this stage. So you start to separate yourselves from your parents, very much so, more than before. Tend to rely more on the peer group, very much so. And it's a pivotal time period in a person's life, paving the way for continued growth and future development of personal relationships. In fact, the brain development that's going on here is going to make concrete many of your habits. So if you have habits right now that you don't like, you need to break them now because they're going to only get harder to break in your future. Erikson believed that you had to find yourself and figure out your role before you could truly feel and express love, which is our next stage in the early adulthood stage of intimacy versus isolation. Can I love others and can I be loved? Pondering entering into a close, loving, often long-term relationship. So on the intimacy part, you develop intimacy and a sense of connectedness with another person, or develop isolation. You draw into oneself and avoid close emotional contact. Generativity versus stagnation. Think of generativity like productivity with a purpose. So am I productive in giving something back to the world? In this stage, you're very much career-oriented, so it makes sense. There's a sense that making a difference through children, job, community involvement. And the generativity side is you're happy with life and feel you've made a difference, a sense of accomplishment. Whereas stagnation, being stagnant, is you just kind of going through the motions, feeling worthless and a preoccupation with your own needs. A midlife crisis would be typical. And finally, you have from 65 years and up, integrity versus despair. Has it all been worth it? You look back and review your life. If you feel a sense of integrity, you look back at life happily, having a strong sense of self-acceptance, and I would do it all over again. Whereas if you feel despair, you develop a sense of despair. You look back at life with frustration, regret, and disappointment.